Captain Jake Morrison was having his morning coffee when the emergency alarm shattered the peaceful quiet of his ship's bridge. The distress signal that came through their communication system made his blood run cold. It wasn't just any ordinary call for help. This was a desperate cry from people who knew they were about to die. The message came from a merchant ship called the Peaceful Journey. These weren't soldiers or warriors, they were simple traders from the Auraxian species, people who had never hurt anyone in their entire lives. They were traveling through space, carrying goods from one planet to another. When the worst possible thing happened to them, pirates had found them. But these weren't just any pirates. They belonged to something called the Grim Cartel, a group so evil and cruel that even other criminals were afraid of them. These monsters didn't just steal cargo and leave. They did much worse things. They killed people for fun. They took prisoners and sold them like animals. And sometimes they did things so horrible that most civilized beings couldn't even think about them. Lieutenant Rebecca Stone, the young woman working at the communication station, turned to Morrison with fear in her eyes. Her hands were shaking as she read the incoming data. Captain, the message says they've already killed half the crew. They're doing terrible things to the survivors. Morrison could hear it himself through the speakers, screaming, crying, the sound of weapons firing, and worst of all, the sick laughter of the pirates as they hurt innocent people. The transmission was breaking up, but he could still make out some words. The Auraxians were begging for someone, anyone, to help them. How far away is the nearest galactic patrol ship? Morrison asked, though he already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. 4 hours, sir, maybe 5, Stone replied. By then, ... She didn't need to finish that sentence. Everyone on the bridge knew what would happen in 4 hours. Peaceful Journey would be empty except for floating bodies. Pirates would be long gone with their stolen goods and captured prisoners. Morrison looked around at his crew. These weren't the usual peacekeeping forces that most alien species were used to seeing. His people came from Earth, a planet so dangerous that other aliens called it a death world. Every single person on his ship had survived wars that would have destroyed weaker species. They had fought in battles where showing mercy meant dying. They knew how to kill, and more importantly, they knew when killing was the right thing to do. Sergeant Tyler Brooks, a man covered in scars from dozens of battles, stepped forward. Captain, we can be there in 30 minutes if we push the engines hard. Morrison nodded slowly. He was thinking about those screaming voices, about families being torn apart by monsters who enjoyed causing pain. In his mind, he could see children crying for parents who would never come home. He thought about the Auraxian culture he had studied. They were peaceful people who believed in helping others and never causing harm. All hands battle stations, Morrison announced over the ship's communication system. His voice was calm, but everyone who knew him could hear the cold anger underneath. This is not a drill. We have innocent civilians under attack by hostile forces. We are moving to intercept and engage. The bridge came alive with activity. Officers ran to their positions, checking weapons and preparing for combat. The ship's engines roared to life, pushing them faster through space than they had ever gone before. Morrison opened a channel to the Marine barracks below. Colonel Hayes, get your teams ready for immediate boarding action. We're going to have company soon, and they're not going to like us very much. As the Vengeful Dawn and her escort ships changed direction toward the distress signal, Morrison made a promise to himself. Those pirates had made a terrible mistake. They had hurt innocent people. And now they were about to learn why humans were feared across the galaxy. Commander Vex was having the best day of his life. His pirates had just captured another merchant ship full of valuable cargo and prisoners to sell. The Auraxian crew had been so easy to catch, they didn't even have real weapons on their ship. Just like most civilized species in the galaxy, they believed that talking could solve every problem. How wrong they were. Vex was a Grim species that had built their entire culture around being stronger and meaner than everyone else. His people had sharp teeth, thick armor-like skin, and claws that could tear through metal. They were natural predators who had spent thousands of years conquering weaker species. In their minds, might made right, and anyone too weak to defend themselves deserved whatever happened to them. "Sir, we have incoming ships," reported his sensor operator. A nervous little creature from a species they had enslaved decades ago. 3 vessels approaching at high speed. Dex laughed and leaned back in his command chair. This was even better than he had hoped. Not only would they get to keep all the cargo and prisoners from the merchant ship, but now they would have even more victims to play with. "Let me see what we're dealing with," he said, activating the main display screen.
When the images appeared,
He laughed even harder. The approaching ships looked primitive and ugly compared to the sleek vessels that most advanced species used. They were basically flying chunks of metal with engines attached. "Captain Voss," he called to his lieutenant, who was still aboard the captured merchant ship, torturing the remaining crew members. "Are you watching this? We're about to have some unexpected guests." Captain Voss's cruel laughter came through the communication system. "What kind of idiots are stupid enough to challenge us? Don't they know who we are? According to our database, they call themselves humans," Dex replied, reading the information that appeared on his screen. "They're from some little planet called Earth that nobody has ever heard of. The report says they only discovered space travel a couple hundred years ago. They're basically still primitives. This made both pirates laugh until their sides hurt. The Grim Cartel had been terrorizing the galaxy for over 2,000 years. They had destroyed entire civilizations and enslaved species that were far more advanced than these so-called humans. The idea that some newcomers from a backwater planet thought they could challenge them was absolutely hilarious. But as Dex studied the sensor readings more carefully, he started to notice some strange things that didn't make sense. These human ships were carrying way more weapons than they should need. Most civilized species carried just enough firepower to defend themselves from asteroids and small pirates. These ships looked like they were built for war. "Why do they have so many crew members?" Voss asked, looking at the same data. "Most species only need 20 or 30 people to run a ship that size. These humans have over 200 on each vessel." Vex frowned. That was weird. More crew members meant more mouths to feed and more space needed for living quarters. It didn't make economic sense unless those extra people weren't just running the ship, unless they were soldiers. The communication intercepts were even more confusing. Most species would be panicking right about now, calling for backup or trying to negotiate. But these humans were talking about things like acceptable losses and boarding procedures, like they did this kind of thing every day. One of them had actually said something about rapid hull penetration tactics. What did that even mean? "Sir," the sensor operator said, his voice now filled with worry instead of excitement. "I'm detecting some unusual weapon signatures from those ships. These readings don't match anything in our database." Vex studied the display more carefully. The humans seemed to be carrying something called kinetic accelerators weapons that fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds. Why would anyone use such primitive weapons when energy beams were so much more efficient? Unless those primitive weapons were actually more effective than they looked. There was also something else. The sensors were detecting what looked like nuclear warheads, but not the kind used for destroying planets. These were smaller, more focused, designed for ship-to-ship combat. Most civilized species had banned nuclear weapons in space combat centuries ago because they were too dangerous and unpredictable. For the first time in his life, Commander Vex began to feel a tiny bit of doubt creeping into his mind. These humans were doing everything wrong according to galactic standards. But they were doing it with such confidence that it made him wonder if maybe they knew something he didn't. "Prepare for combat," he ordered his crew, though he tried to keep the uncertainty out of his voice. These primitives are about to learn why nobody challenges the Grim Cartel. But deep down, Dex was starting to suspect that he might be the one about to learn something new. Captain Morrison's voice cut through space like a blade. His message to the pirate ships was simple and direct, the kind of communication that left no room for misunderstanding. He wasn't interested in negotiating or making deals. He'd seen what these monsters did to innocent people, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. "Grim vessel, you have exactly 60 seconds to release every single hostage and surrender completely. If you refuse, we will destroy you." "Commander?" Dix's response came back almost immediately, filled with the arrogant laughter that had intimidated countless victims before. Little human, you don't seem to understand the situation. We have your precious Alraxian friends here with us. If you attack us, they die first. How about this? We'll give you half of them back if you let us go free." Morrison didn't even blink. He had heard this same threat from pirates, terrorists, and war criminals across dozens of different worlds. The answer was always the same. "Time's up," Morrison said quietly into his communication device. What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for generations. The human ships opened fire with weapons that defied everything the pirates thought. They knew about space combat. Instead of energy beams that could be deflected or absorbed, the humans used something much more primitive and infinitely more terrifying: rail guns. These weapons fired chunks of dense metal at speeds that turned them into unstoppable bullets. The projectiles hit the pirate ships with the force of small meteors, punching through their armor like it was made of paper. Within seconds, the main pirate vessel was crippled, its engines destroyed and its weapon systems offline. But Morrison wasn't done. While his ships kept the remaining pirates busy, he unleashed something that most galactic species only whispered about in fearful stories: human marines. Colonel Austin Hayes had been waiting for this moment. He was a man who had survived wars on 3 different planets, conflicts so brutal that most aliens couldn't even imagine them. His Marines were the same veterans who had learned to fight in the most dangerous places in the universe. "Drop pods." "Away," Hayes announced as his assault teams launched from the human ships. These weren't the careful, cautious boarding shuttles that most species used. These were armored capsules designed to punch through enemy hulls and deliver trained killers directly into combat. The drop pods slammed into the captured merchant ship like guided missiles, their reinforced hulls tearing through the outer armor and creating instant entry points. Before the pirates even knew what was happening, human Marines were pouring into their captured ship. Sergeant Blake Cooper was the first through the breach, the squad moving behind him with the kind of coordination that only came from years of fighting together. What the pirates saw emerging from the smoking holes in their ship's hull were creatures unlike anything they had ever encountered. Humans didn't fight like other galactic species. Most aliens preferred to stay at long range using energy weapons. And trying to avoid close combat, humans did the exact opposite. They moved forward relentlessly, using weapons designed for the kind of brutal, up-close fighting that their homeworld had taught them. Cooper and his team swept through the ship's corridors like a force of nature. Their weapons were loud, violent things that fired explosive rounds and left devastating damage in their wake. But it wasn't just their equipment that was terrifying, it was the way they used it. The pirates had expected to fight soldiers who would be careful about hitting hostages or damaging the ship. Instead, they found themselves facing warriors who could fire with surgical precision while running at full speed, who could calculate angles and trajectories while under heavy fire, who seemed to know exactly where every enemy was hiding. The Alraxian hostages, huddled in terror in various parts of the ship, watched in amazement as their rescuers worked. These humans moved through the ship like they had memorized every corridor, every room, every hiding place. They communicated with hand signals and short, efficient words that somehow let them coordinate complex attacks without giving away their positions. What shocked the aliens most was how the humans dealt with the pirates who tried to use hostages as shields. Instead of backing down or trying to negotiate, the human Marines simply found better angles, used more precise weapons, or created distractions that separated the criminals from their victims. Sergeant Cooper found himself faced with a group of pirates who had barricaded themselves in the ship's main cargo hold with a dozen Alraxian prisoners. The pirates were screaming threats, promising to kill the hostages if the humans didn't retreat. Cooper's response was to signal his team, count to 3, and then demonstrate why humans were considered the galaxy's most dangerous predators, using flashbang grenades to blind the pirates and precision rifles to take them down. His squad eliminated every threat in under 10 seconds without harming a single hostage. The battle was over almost before it began, but its impact would echo across the galaxy forever. The battle was turning into a nightmare for the grim pirates, but not in the way they had expected. Throughout their long history of terrorizing the galaxy, they had developed certain rules that always worked. Take hostages, threaten innocent lives, and watch your enemies back down. It had never failed before. Captain Voss was learning that humans didn't follow the same rules as everyone else. Voss had grabbed an Alraxian family, a mother, father, and their young child, and dragged them to the ship's main corridor. He held his weapon against the child's head while screaming at the advancing human marines. In his twisted mind, this was checkmate. No civilized species would risk harming an innocent child. "Stay back, you primitive animals," Voss shouted, his voice echoing through the damaged ship. "One more step, and this little one dies. I know you soft-hearted species can't handle that kind of guilt." The human marines stopped advancing, and for a moment Voss thought his old tactics were working. But what he didn't understand was that they weren't stopping out of helplessness. They were stopping to let their best marksman get into position. Technician Danny Riley was what humans called a sniper specialist. He had trained for years to make shots that other species would consider impossible. His rifle wasn't just a weapon, it was a precision instrument connected to computers that could calculate wind speed, gravity, and dozens of other factors in milliseconds. Riley found his position 3 rooms away from where Voss was holding his hostages. Between him and his target were 3 thick metal walls, pipes, and electrical systems. Any normal person would have said the shot was impossible. Riley just smiled and started calculating angles. His targeting computer began working, creating a 3-dimensional map of everything between him and the pirate. It calculated how his special armor-piercing rounds would travel through each obstacle, how they would slow down, how they would change direction. Within seconds, he had a clear path that would take his bullet exactly where it needed to go. Voss was still shouting threats when Riley's bullet found him. The round passed through 3 walls, around 2 pipe systems, and struck the pirate leader in the exact center of his head. Voss dropped instantly, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the floor. The Alraxian family stood there in shock, completely unharmed. Commander Thex watched this impossible shot through his security cameras. He felt something he had never experienced before: pure terror. These humans weren't just better fighters than he had expected. They were operating on a completely different level than any species he had ever encountered. Throughout the ship, his pirates were being systematically hunted down by human marines, who seemed to know exactly where everyone was hiding. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, appearing and disappearing without warning. Worse, they weren't just defeating his forces, they were doing it while protecting every single hostage. Dex finally understood what he was dealing with. These humans came from a planet called Earth, a world so dangerous that most galactic databases classified it as unsurvivable. But humans hadn't just survived there, they had thrived. They had spent millions of years competing with creatures that could kill them with claws, teeth, venom, and pure strength. In response, humans had become something unique in the galaxy, a species that used their intelligence to become better, killers than any natural predator. They had turned warfare into a science, and violence into an art form. The reports Thex had read about Earth started to make sense. It was a planet where massive storms could destroy entire cities, where the very air could become poison, where creatures existed that could hunt and kill anything. Humans had not only survived in that environment, they had become its apex predators. Units cease resistance, Thex transmitted to his remaining forces. "We surrender unconditionally." Yes. But his message came too late. Colonel Hayes and his Marines had already made their decision. Throughout their military careers, they had learned one simple rule: anyone who hurt innocent people, especially children, had forfeited their right to mercy. The human Marines continued their advance, their faces cold and determined. They weren't angry or emotional. They were simply doing what needed to be done, the same way their ancestors had dealt with dangerous predators back on Earth, one by one. The remaining pirates were found and eliminated. Some tried to surrender, others tried to hide, a few attempted. To fight it didn't matter. The humans were relentless, methodical, and absolutely unstoppable. In less than an hour, Every pirate aboard the captured ship was either dead or wishing they were. The hostages were safe, the ship was secure, and Commander Thex was beginning to understand that his 1,000-year reign of terror was about to come to an end. The humans had arrived, and they had brought with them a simple message that would spread throughout the galaxy. Predators who hurt innocent people would face the consequences of their actions, no matter who they were or how powerful they thought they were. The moment the last pirate fell, something incredible happened that shocked every Alraxian witness. The same human warriors who had just eliminated their captors with ruthless efficiency immediately transformed into something completely different. These weren't the cold, calculating killers from moments before. They were now gentle healers rushing to save lives. Captain Morrison's voice could be heard throughout the ship. But now, instead of giving battle orders, he was coordinating medical teams. I need trauma units in sections 4 and 7 immediately. We have civilians with severe injuries. Move, people. Every second counts. Sergeant Kelly Anderson, whose armor was still splattered with the blood of the pirates she had eliminated, was now kneeling beside a wounded Alraxian child. Her hands, which had held deadly weapons just minutes earlier, were now carefully checking the little one's injuries with the gentleness of a parent. The child looked up at her with fear at first, but something in Anderson's eyes, a warmth and compassion that seemed impossible after what she had just done, made the young alien feel safe. The rescued Alraxians couldn't understand what they were witnessing. In their culture, warriors and healers were completely separate professions. The idea that the same person could be both a deadly fighter and a caring medic was beyond their comprehension. Yet here were these humans switching between roles as easily as changing clothes. Dr. Nathan Cruz, the ship's chief medical officer, had set up a field hospital in the merchant vessel's cargo bay. He worked alongside Marine medics who just hours earlier had been preparing for combat. Now they were racing to save the lives of beings they had never met, showing the same intensity and focus they had displayed in battle. This one needs surgery. Immediately, Dr. Cruz called out as he examined an elderly Alraxian who had been tortured by the pirates. Get me an operating table set up. We're not losing anyone today. The news of what happened spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting footage of the rescue. The images were startling to most galactic civilizations, humans effortlessly transitioning from warriors to healers, showing compassion for beings they had never met while displaying no mercy for those who harmed innocents. What really caught the attention of galactic intelligence agencies wasn't just the rescue itself, but what happened afterward. Reports began coming in from across the galaxy about a strange phenomenon. Piracy rates were dropping dramatically in areas where human ships patrolled. Trade routes that had been dangerous for centuries were suddenly safe. The criminal organizations that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years were doing something they had never done before. They were avoiding certain areas of space. Entirely, word had spread through the underworld about what humans did to those who hurt innocent people. And nobody wanted to find out if the stories were true. Captain Troy Williams of the merchant vessel Lucky Star reported his experience 6 months after the Alraxian rescue. We were carrying medical supplies to a colony world when 3 pirate ships surrounded us. Just when we thought we were done for, we heard something beautiful, human ship engines dropping out of hyperspace. The pirates didn't even try to fight. They just ran. It was amazing. Similar stories were being reported throughout the galaxy. The mere presence of human ships was enough to send criminals fleeing in the opposite direction. Pirates who had built their reputations on being the toughest predators in space were now afraid of a species that most had never even heard of a year earlier. Admiral Jeremy Thompson sat in his command chair aboard the human flagship Defender. Reading the latest patrol reports with satisfaction, the numbers told an incredible story. Merchant vessel attacks down by 90%. Slave trading operations completely shut down in 3 major sectors, and pirate organizations voluntarily relocating to areas far away from human patrol routes. Sir, reported his aide, Lieutenant Commander Ashley Brooks. The Galactic Council wants to present you with their highest honor for maintaining peace and security.
Oh.
They're calling it the most effective anti-piracy campaign in galactic history. Thompson smiled as he looked out at the stars. The humans had proven something important to the galaxy. Sometimes the best way to protect innocent people is to make sure that those who would hurt them were too afraid to try. The age of human protection had begun. And criminals across the galaxy were learning a simple lesson. There were worse things than death worlds in the universe. Yeah? There were the creatures that death worlds created, and those creatures had decided that innocent people deserved to live in peace. The sound of human engines dropping out of hyperspace had become the most feared sound in the criminal underworld, and the most welcome sound to honest beings everywhere.